hour and 5 minutes. We're going to break around about 7:15, 7:20 for about 20 minutes. It's an opportunity for you guys to network and get to know each other and have some wonderful free snacks as well. And then we're going to pick up around 7:40 again, and we're going to go on till 8:15. Men's restrooms are out there, outside the door, and ladies' restrooms are inside here. I think that should do it. So without further ado, Prakash.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Good evening. My name is Prakash Petarpur. I work in Cisco Systems. So what I'm going to talk about is a transformation of a program that I was leading, but the reference is not just to that program, it's transformation in general. I have about 30 plus years of software development experience. I've been doing all other waterfall methodologies as well in the past, then iterative, incremental, spiral, all areas I've been working on. And as they were coming about, I was involved in those kinds of software development methodologies. Then around 2006, 2007, when we started developing the next generation operating system in Cisco, we got involved in doing Agile. I know this form of Agile Scrum, was introduced around 2001 by some of the well-known software developers. You must all have been familiar with that. I'll have a chart which talks about the values and principles that they came up in their manifesto at that time. But we only started in my group, in our organization, we started around 2006, 2007 when we built the next generation operating system. And after that, I moved to another group, another business unit, in services, Cisco services. So there, right from the beginning, all my projects, I started introducing Agile. And looking at that success, the whole business unit started migrating towards Agile as well. We were involved in Agile transformation. I have a couple of colleagues from my group that were also involved in Agile transformation. And here we are going to talk about one of the programs that made the journey, and I could get some data before the transformation and then some data during and after the transformation. Otherwise, it's generally very difficult to get all this data to log and report about it. Luckily, I had some data. Some data may be missing, but only the ones that I have I'm presenting here in terms of what happened during the transformation. Before we get on to the transformation, I will give some introduction to Agile, but not in a typical format where people talk more about what is Agile and details of all the rituals and ceremonies and practices and all. I'm not going to talk about that. I don't know if you have watched a TED video by Simon Sinek. He talks about how to present things when you want to present about anything. And he takes the example of Apple, how successful they are, kind of thing. So you need to start with why, how, and then talk about what. So that's the same approach I'm going to use here. And a lot of the materials come from what I wrote in my blogs. So you can actually look at the blogs and get more detailed information from there as well. So why are we talking about Agile transformation? Is because we know that many software projects are generally not successful because one factor or the other impacts development. So we'll talk about some of the successes and failures of Agile, software projects, and we'll talk about why they fail and what Agile brings to the table to make it successful. So we'll do some comparison between traditional methods and Agile. What are the differences in philosophy, those kind of things. And then we'll have a workshop. We'll talk about some of the project scenarios for the program that I'm talking about. Before the journey, which situation it was in, and what was done to do the transformation. So the workshop will be about, at your table, you can pick up one of the cases within those scenarios and come up with a recommendation, what you would do if you were going to adopt Agile for addressing that particular issue. And then we'll walk through what we did and just compare them. So that's the general agenda. Let's go to the first slide where we talk about what do we mean by success and failure factors for traditional projects. If you look at the chaos report, how many of you are familiar with chaos report? So they have been documenting project successes and failures for the past about 11 years or so, and they have come up with what are the reasons that impact software projects. There was a question from somebody, are we only going to talk about software here, or are we going to talk about hardware and Agile as well? I'm sort of restricting my conversation to software projects only because many times we are very comfortable in handling hardware projects in a non-agile fashion as well. The reason being, in software what happens is we'll always be solving new problems. There's never a repeat problem that we'll solve. If there is a repeat problem, there's no point in having software do that work. If it's a bridge construction, if it's some other road construction, everybody knows exactly what needs to be done. So you can plan it to nth degree and implement it successfully. What happens in software is we are always solving a new problem. Even if we are solving the same old problem, technology will be new. Something else is new. So there's always going to be a lot of variability in software. So that's why addressing software problem is what we are going to focus on here more. And there are many agile methods also, Scrum, Kanban, so many others, but I think the iteration, the focus on iteration is with Scrum. And so when I talk about Agile, in general, it's about Scrum that we'll talk about here. So when you analyze all the project success and failure factors, this is a different way of organizing the information, what I have here. The inputs come from chaos report, but you won't see this way presented anywhere. So you will see that requirements, users, delivery-related issues play a major role in software success. You can see that when they are not done well, you'll see that projects get challenged or impaired. That's the biggest factor. And you will see how we will address that in Agile, or what's the philosophy in Agile to address that. Similarly, planning and tracking related issues, that's the next level of success factor. But when it is impaired, no matter how well you plan, that 15%, no matter how well you plan and execute, it's not useful. Similarly, if a project is challenged, probably planning and tracking, people were doing such a fantastic job. So there was no impaired factor in that category. So you will see that that's minimal here, almost zero. Now, executives and stakeholder support, clarity related is the next factor. But when a project is successful, that's important. But when it is failure, you will see that that plays a major role. that's something we don't fix in Agile, although what happens in Agile is you engage all these stakeholders, executives and all as much as possible through repeated deliveries, continuous deliveries. So it does play a good, important role in success in that area as well. And then the staffing and other factors, this is the summary of the failure cases and success cases in traditional projects. And so we'll use that to build upon what we do in Agile to overcome these deficiencies. It's one thing to talk about general chaos report or some other report and say that, oh, that's the reason we need to do Agile. But it really needs to apply to what we want to do as well. So I wanted to bring up where we were in our journey before the program started adopting Agile. We had a high number of customer problems. Our partners and customers were disengaged with our deliveries. We had stopped working on our project for many releases because the resources were diverted to building something else that wasn't really contributing to the customer's needs. We had a large distributed and scattered team. There were people with a lot of dysfunctional attitudes. By the way, what we'll do is I'll have a write-up. We'll have this write-up to distribute it to every one of the tables so that as part of the workshop you will read that and discuss that and see what measures that you would do to overcome those deficiencies. So I'll not spend too much time on describing all these things, but as you can see, there are lots of problems that we wanted to address. So specifically, product quality, partner and customer collaboration, team composition, team dynamics, architecture updates, and then how we remove wasteful activities. These were the main areas where we focused on when we adopted Agile.
Could I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
What do you mean by dysfunctional attitudes?
So we'll talk about that a little bit. The dysfunctional attitude in the sense that people had the attitude, I'm not going to work on this feature because this is not my area of expertise. Or I don't like it. I'm a UI designer, UI developer. I don't want to do any back-end work. Or there is need to do testing, but I don't want to do testing. I'm a developer. That kind of attitude, right? So one of the things that we talk about in Agile is to have broader skills so that you can fit into other roles as well. But when people said, or they would say, no, I want to become a manager, I want to become a team lead, I don't want to code. Those attitudes were dysfunctional attitudes that were there. So how does Agile address these kinds of needs? We encourage close customer collaboration. So when there is any, we'll talk about in detail how we do that. And then we address their needs in a very timely manner. We try to build quality into the product upfront, not develop some time and throw it across the fence to a QA person or QA team and do the testing. So it's very important how you build quality into the product upfront. How do you compose the team? How do you empower the team? How do you inculcate lean thinking among all the team members and everybody that's involved in the project? How do you do frequent retrospection? So Agile emphasizes on frequent retrospection so that you can correct your course as early as possible. Fail fast, fail small, and learn from the mistakes and course correct. That's the goal. And then learning from the failures. So I'll have a summary slide in the end, just comparing the attributes of a traditional way of doing things versus agile way of doing things. But let's look at details now in each of these areas, how agile accommodates. So one of the most important factor in agile is delivering early, continuously delivering values, and providing highest values as early as possible to the customer. If you look at this picture here, if you are in software development, you usually find that at time T2 is when the project is complete, and that's when the value is passed on to the customer. But if you are providing intermediate deliveries, then at starting time T1, you can start delivering to the customer based on whatever you have developed. Of course, that needs some discipline, what you can deliver. There are lots of terminologies of what you do, minimum viable product. So what are those? I should give all the terminologies. Potentially shippable increment, and how do you compose your user stories? How do you want to make it vertical slices, end-to-end functionality? These are all the considerations that you should have before you think of delivering something to the customer. If you have some components that don't mean anything to the customer and we develop all those things and deliver to customers, they say, what is this? It doesn't make sense to me. What we want to deliver in each one of these vertical slices is something that makes sense to that customer. So it's very important that we always try to find a customer that's willing to take these kinds of intermediate deliverables, so that there are other benefits in doing that. I remember a friend of mine recently, he went to a startup and he started introducing Agile in his organizations. They were pretty successful. They had some kind of monopoly in what they were doing. They were already successful, so they were all resisting. Why do we want to embrace Agile? But as he introduced Agile and as the team started embracing and they started delivering some intermediate deliverables and demoing it to their stakeholders, their executives and some customers, the customers and their stakeholders started getting very impressed and they started giving valuable feedback. In the past, what had happened was, whatever they delivered, at the end of the cycle, when they delivered something, customers just took it, even though they were unhappy with what came about, they didn't say anything because that's what they could get. Now, because they showed something to the customer and to the stakeholders early, they started giving valuable feedback, and in the end, when they actually delivered something at time T2, the product was of such a great quality, it met all the needs of their customer. The customers didn't need to say, oh, we'll just live with it. They were very delighted to have such a product, right? So that's what is encouraged in terms of providing close customer collaboration. Determining technical feasibility. Of course, if we go through the whole cycle and deliver something at the end of T2, it depends on how long that cycle is. I remember long time ago, I was in a telecom company, which was a very successful telecom company. They had the best switches built, but it was 2 million or more lines of spaghetti code. And that was the time when object-oriented programming was coming to play, and we were all delighted to rewrite that whole software using object-oriented approach. So there were about 5,000 developers involved in that project, and we worked for 2 years, built a fantastic architecture, and then we wanted to do the first call after 2 years. And when we went for demoing the first call, you pick up the phone, it took 45 seconds to get the dial tone. you know that as soon as you pick up the phone, you get the dial tone immediately. It took 45 seconds to get the dial tone. And when we made the call from one phone to another in the same lab, it took about 45 minutes for the call to go through because the performance was so bad that the way we had done. But because we were replacing the whole system, we had to build the entire, we thought we had to build the entire system before we could validate anything. So we couldn't test the technical feasibility before because of these kinds of problems. But what we want to encourage is in Agile, try to validate your technical approach as early as possible so that you don't get into so much of wastage. Of course, we spent another 2 years to optimize the whole thing and we built another system which was very good, but that's a different matter. It took almost 4 years to get into the market. Testing market readiness, another example from that same company, which was a great company. We built, I wasn't involved in that project, but there were visionaries who had already anticipated where the market was going to go. So we built a video voice integrated switch in late 80s. And people did a lot of work, got the whole product done, and when we went to deploy, it was not successful because there was no bandwidth available in the network at that time to support such a bandwidth-rich application. So, if we had followed the Agile approach, we would have tried out these kind of things with customers early, and we would have encountered those problems early, and so we would have abandoned it or did something else to instead. So, testing market readiness is another important factor. Similarly, leveraging early opportunities. I don't know if you are familiar with Lean Startup. There is a book written by Eric Ries. Anybody familiar with Lean Startup? So there he talks about how do you leverage early revenue opportunities. By delivering these kind of things earlier, you can even sell that to the customers if it's of a good quality. Similarly, you can get to the market quickly so that you can avert any losing market opportunity. So there are lots of these kinds of advantages for getting things into the market. The other part on salvaging partly finished product, there was an example where in another program that I was there, we had, the program went on for maybe about 2 years and it wasn't successful, and we had parts of it that we had developed. The network management piece that we had developed, we could actually package it with another product, the earlier version of the product, and we could salvage some out of it. Just because we followed the principle of breaking it up and completing those parts, we could do that. Here is another example of how to deliver higher value rather than waiting for going through the regular way of doing things, implementing your iterations. C1 is the curve where I showed before, where normal way of thinking about what can be delivered to the customer. But if you rearrange your deliverables in such a way that the higher values come first, within a limited time, even before, let's say, in 50% of your time, you can even deliver 80% of the value. There may be some other smaller applications, some smaller features that may not make so much sense to the customer that either you can deliver to round out your product, or you can even abandon and move on to providing other valuable features in the roadmap. But remember, all these things are possible only if you pay close attention to how you are breaking down the features. It's very important to have end-to-end vertical slices of all the capabilities that you do that has customer impacts, and the user stories, the features, all of those things you need to put, we need to put a lot of attention to those details. The last part on enabling roadmap reshuffle, I'll talk about it later as part of our transformation where we use that as an example. The other important set of factors are good architecture and design. Sometimes it's a myth that people think that, oh, if you are doing Agile, then there is no architecture involved because you have to build everything before you can do any software development. But that's not true. When we built the next generation operating system in around 2007, it was a brand new product, but we built it in an agile fashion because you can provide sufficient architectural runway for the rest of the team to start implementing it. And that's all possible only if you have the architects embedded as part of the team. If architects sit in an ivory tower and not be part of the team, if architects don't code, then all these things will not work. There will be a big disconnect between what the architect says and what the team needs. And even if architect delivers something to the team will not be able to make use of it. So it's very important that they are connected. There should be some transparency between what architect provides into the team and the architect needs to understand what the development needs are. So similar is the situation with UI UX as well. You can work on providing a UI UX. How many of you know what UI UX I'm talking about? User experience. So even for doing some of the user experience work also, there is a myth that says, oh, if it's Agile, you cannot do UI because you need to have everything thought out before you start the project. But that's not true again. It's a similar situation like architecture. The next part is talking about the dependencies between the components and teams. I know some of you were there on in the Monday meetup from the Silicon Valley Agile Leadership Meetup, where Ken Rubin talked about the components and dependencies and all. He did such a fantastic job. I cannot reproduce what he said, but you can join some of those meetups and get some information. But it's a very important factor. How do we design the system? If we build so many interdependencies, this is an example of a release planning map where all these red yarn show the dependencies between different components. And if you start building all these kinds of dependencies and then just map them and not solve them, not address them, and remove them to simplify the program, then Agile is not going to help. Just saying that we are doing Agile and building a Gantt chart with all those dependencies is like doing the traditional way of software development. What Agile wants us to do is to remove those dependencies, simplify them. So it's not just the inter-component, it's also the inter-team dependencies that I know we cannot remove all dependencies, but we really need to take a careful approach to simplify and reduce such dependencies if you want to really be Agile. So, simple is Agile. Simplicity is agility. If it is too complicated, and if you have made things very complicated, then really Agile will not help. So, how many of you have heard about an operating system called Multics? Okay, I see 2 hands. So Multics was an operating system that was developed in early 60s when computer science was maturing and people were really interested in building a next generation time sharing operating system which anybody in the world can use. So all these brilliant people got together and built a whole bunch of capabilities into that operating system, and they called it Multics because it was taking care of all the multiple needs that were coming from all areas, all directions. Around 68 or so, 68, 69, they found that that operating system was not going to work. It was too big, too complicated, they couldn't add more capabilities, it wouldn't run on any hardware that they had. It was just not practical. So a couple of the brilliant people from that team went away and they wanted to build another operating system which was completely opposite to the principle or philosophy that Multics was using. And they called it Unix as a pun to the name Multics. And now you know how popular Unix is. It is the most popular operating system because it was built with the Agile principles in place. I don't know, it may be really hard to read, but if you look at the principles that were used, you will really admire that, oh, these are the same Agile principles that we are talking about. It says, make each program do one thing well. To do a new job, build afresh rather than complicate old programs by adding new features. Expect the output of every program to become input to another, as yet unknown program. Don't clutter output with extraneous information, blah, blah. Design and build software, even operating systems, to be tried early, ideally within weeks. This is exactly the kind of things that we are talking about in Agile, right? Don't hesitate to throw away the clumsy parts and rebuild them. This is what we talk about in Agile too, refactoring. We want to try out things, fail fast, learn and move on. Use tools in preference to unskilled help to lighten a programming task. Even if you have to detour to build the tools and expect to throw some of them even after you have finished using them. This is the same approach in terms of encouraging DevOps. Tools, continuous integration, continuous testing, using tools to do things, not manual way of doing things. These were the same principles that was used in building Unix, and that's how it's popular. So that's the same philosophy that we want to use in Agile. And you will see that it echoes the same philosophy all the time in Agile. So the next part that I want to talk about how Agile drives success is in good planning and execution. But there is another myth. Oh, we are Agile, there is no need to plan. We just start implementing. How many of you have heard that statement here? Agile means no planning, right? That's totally wrong. As you can see, there are multiple levels of planning, and I've combined many of them into one level: release, roadmap, program, project, or program increment, whatever. I've combined them all just to show that philosophically they are all similar, something that's more than a sprint planning. And then there is the portfolio and vision and strategy. So this is a familiar picture, I don't know if it hasn't come out well, of the onion, Agile planning onion is called. Various levels of planning. So we want to plan, but we want to plan just enough, not spend countless amount of time planning for something that's not going to happen 6 months down the road. We want to plan as that is important. And so at the continuous level, there is test-driven development, there is continuous integration, continuous build. All the things that we want to make sure that anything that we put in, we see the failure immediately. We want to learn from these failures, fix them, and move on. You've seen the daily planning. I think many of you are familiar with Agile means daily stand-ups. And then what happens is the project managers or scrum masters routinely start asking those 3 questions, and then it's a status report and you just ask those questions and move on. That's not the purpose of daily planning. Again, that's another opportunity to retrospect and see what we have done wrong, what can we do better, what are the obstacles, how can we remove. Even if we don't ask those questions, it doesn't matter. As long as we achieve that goal, that's what Agile matters. So, it's not the ritual, it's what's behind the ritual that matters in Agile. Now, release and roadmap planning or sprint planning. So, sprint planning is another important activity where, and that is only successful only if we have a well-groomed backlog of all the user stories that we want to implement, and we know what needs to get done in that sprint. If we don't have a good backlog, then there's no sprint planning can be successful. That's for the current sprint. But what about something that comes 3 months down the road, 2 months down the road? How much do we need to plan? In our traditional approach, we have to plan everything. If it's a 6-month project, plan for 6 months. If it's a 1-year project, plan for 1 year to the same level of detail, whether it's going to happen tomorrow or 1 year down the road. In Agile, that's not the philosophy. Something that's immediately taken over, taken out, you plan adequately. If it's something that's coming a few sprints down the road, plan at a higher level, not to that level of granularity. And then for future releases, even less granular. So you do planning, but not to the same level at every step. I won't talk much about the portfolio and vision and strategy, because in many cases, many organizations have their own way of handling portfolio. So that's another entirely different topic to talk about, so I'll not cover that as part of good planning and execution. The next part to talk about is on the estimation. How do we do estimation? In Agile, do we do the same way like how traditionally we do? A project manager or some other manager will come and say, oh, this takes so much time, this takes so much time, and then the team is forced to abide by that, or we know the deadline, so we just work backwards and say, you have so much time to do design and development and coding and testing. That's how the milestones are built. But in Agile, it's different. The team sits together and plans what they need to do. They estimate how much each activity takes. If something is coming up way later, there is so much of uncertainty in those kinds of activities, we may use approximate estimations such as t-shirt sizes. Or if it is very close, then you may start using story points. If it's the current sprint that you want to estimate, you may estimate in terms of number of hours. So there is a different level of estimation that you do depending on how close that activity is to you. So there is estimation required in Agile, but you don't necessarily have to estimate at the same level of granularity at each of the milestones. Risk management. How do we handle risks in waterfall? I remember managing waterfall projects, and before we do the commit, there's 1 week we'll spend analyzing all the risks that may or may not happen for the rest of the 1 year. And then we come up with all sorts of mitigation plans and spend countless number of hours to document all these things, get approvals and all those things. Finally to find that most of the risks that we thought would happen would never happen, but something else happened. And we are not ready for that. So Jeff Sutherland, when he was visiting Silicon Valley, he was giving a talk in Cisco, and he said, all these risk management and all these plans that we build, it's like a map that you take to the battlefield. In map it says something, and then you go to the battlefield and you see a big trench there. What do? You take a different route. You don't say, oh no, my map is right, I'm just going to walk through that trench. You just fall in. So planning is required, risk management is required, but how much you analyze and how adaptable you are, that's what is important. And in Agile, the focus is that adaptability. So in a traditional project, risk management, when you look at risks, the project is very risky in the beginning, but only near the end, as the testing starts happening, you will find out that risks start reducing. In Agile, that's not the case. What happens is, as soon as you start delivering some things to the customer, your risk is already down, your risk is already low. You have a better confidence on how you can deliver the final product. So this is how risk comes down in Agile, whereas in the traditional projects, risk is only coming down at the end of the project. So you can see what's a better approach, right? About how do you track projects? What about the visibility to track projects? How much of the projects do you know how project is doing when you're executing? I remember in one of the projects that we were working on using the waterfall approach. It was a 1-year project. There were some 20 teams that were involved and managers were reporting how much they have completed. And every month they started coming in and looking at what they did. They said, oh yeah, it's 10% complete, it's 20% complete, 30% complete. It went on. 11th month came. We were all 90% complete. And then there was a lot of pressure to show progress because executives were looking for that progress. So we said the next week when the meeting happened, 91% complete, 92% complete. And then it didn't move because there were lots of problems in the project. We were just reporting based on how much code was written or how much test was written, those kind of things. But the whole system never came together. And what happened? It took almost 1 more year for that rest of the 5% to complete because it was a large system that had to be put together. And that's what happens in a traditional project where the visibility to project is very good in the beginning because you've done all the analysis. But then the final visibility comes only at the end of the project. Whereas in an Agile project, you will see the visibility all the time because as soon as you're delivering every sprint or every program increment, potentially shippable increment, it's a success. And your percentage of delivery is based on how much you've already delivered and how much is yet to be delivered. So it's so concrete, and that's how the tracking becomes successful, and so Agile projects become successful. So this is how you compare and contrast what happens with the traditional approach versus an Agile approach. The other important factor is the teaming and collaboration and people aspects of Agile. There is a lot of material on this one, and this is an important factor that we emphasize in Agile. Building teams, building high-performing teams. How do you empower the team members? How do you get them to take responsibility for decisions? As long as somebody is telling them what to do and they don't feel that ownership, it's not going to be successful. The team has to feel that ownership. We need to cultivate that kind of attitude with the team members. They need to collaborate with each other, within the team, outside the team, closely, and make things happen. How do you do the leadership? We need to know when to delegate, how much to delegate, what to delegate. There are some, I won't cover too much here because this is itself a big topic and there's a lot of material out there on how the agile teaming should be handled and how the leaders should handle the servant leadership aspects, those kind of things. So the leaders should know how to balance between when to step in and when to step back. If they're stepping in all the time, then the ownership from the team's part will be lacking. If you go away too far, then if something goes wrong, you're not there to help them out. So the leader should be a coach. Just like how in a game, the coach is always around the periphery, running around, watching, looking at what's going on, encouraging the team to do. He won't pick up the ball and deliver it to the goal. He'll be there to encourage and support and watching all the time. That's how the leader should be. Obstacle removal is another important thing. When the team encounters obstacles, how do you step in to help remove the obstacles? And if this is done, the team will be really happy. The customers will be satisfied with the deliveries. The team will be satisfied with what they have done. There is nothing like somebody forcing something on them. So, yes.
So in teaming, you didn't talk about co-location. A lot of literature I read talks about teams need to be co-located, but can you talk some about geographical disbursement of teams that are spread worldwide, multiple countries, etc.?
Yeah. So the question is, I didn't talk about co-location. When there are geographically distributed teams, how do we handle them? I will cover them. That's a mechanics aspect of it, not a philosophy, principle kind of thing. That's why I didn't cover in the first part. That's actually coming as part of one of the exercises. And then after the exercise, how we handle, I'll talk about it. And yes, valid question. So, to summarize, agile values versus waterfall values, you can see in agile, we want to encourage early and frequent delivery. In waterfall or traditional approach, the focus is on delivering on time and on budget. Do you agree? Right? In agile, we want to encourage customer collaboration as much as possible and an ongoing basis. In waterfall, we make commitments when the project starts and we have to deliver to those commitments. Agile, the focus is on adaptation, how quickly we are able to respond to change. In waterfall, the focus is on getting it right the first time. Now, if you are solving all new problems every time and new technologies and rapidly changing technologies, how easy is it to get it right the first time, if that is the emphasis, right? In Agile, people come first because we want to talk about people, whereas in traditional approaches we talk about resources. So, in Agile we are very careful to not say they are resources, they are people. We want to make that distinction. Yes.
Just a comment. My CEO, my executive staff, they value deliver on time and on budget. They only value early and frequent delivery if it gives them something. They don't value early and frequent delivery. They value in the result. And the result they want is on time and on budget with delighted customers. That's what they want. So my executive staff is not really lined up to the values of Agile, and more lined up to the waterfall values.
So the comment is that the executive staff is more aligned with delivering on time and on budget. They don't care that much about early and frequent delivery. That's a shift that needs to happen. And I'm not saying that just because we deliver something early and frequently doesn't mean that we don't deliver on time and on budget. Although on budget may be questionable, because if there are variables that come into play, then we should be able to defend those criteria and work with our customers and executive staff and all to say why something is not possible to be done. Because we end up, when there are so many variables, we end up failing the project because we anyway cannot deliver on time and on budget. It's better to engage all these stakeholders early enough to show them the path where we are going, rather than giving them a surprise in the end, saying that we are late. So that's the approach. It's important that we want to deliver on time, but then when scope is changing, because of whatever technology change, whatever else is there, how is it possible to deliver on time and on budget? They need to understand that, and that's where Agile comes in to say, here, these are the points for you to understand why things need to be changed in terms of delivering milestones.
So one comment.
Yes.
Also, what you deliver is different. On the right side, you deliver today what you committed to deliver a year ago, which may not be what the customer wants today. On the left side, you want to adapt to what the customer really wants. So you may end up delivering something completely different than what you thought you would deliver a year ago. But still, it's what the customer wants today.
Right. My statement was my CEO and executive staff, they value on time, on budget, and delighted customers. That was the full statement I made.
Yes.
Right? My executive staff wants delighted customers. That's what they want. But they don't want an open-ended budget. I mean, they don't value early and frequent delivery. That's not a result, right? They value the result. And that means they're not going to pay infinite for it. They're not going to wait forever for it. And when they get it, they want their customers to be delighted. That's clearly the result.
So what we have to tell them is, in order to get to that result that you want, you have to choose the left side. If you go with the right side, you will not get it.
Right.
Yeah. So the discussion here was about, I think it's better you say that.
Let's repeat it? Or what?
Yeah, just give.
Oh, okay, so my comment was, what you deliver is different on the right side than on the left side. On the right side, you deliver today what you committed to deliver a year ago, which may not be what the customer really wants today, because things change, requirements change, right? So on the left side, that's really the path that will get you to customer satisfaction, because you deliver what the customer wants today, which could be very different than what you thought it would be a year ago. So you're not delivering really the same things, but in order to deliver what the customer really wants today, you have to choose the left side, the path on the left side.
I'll repeat the question.
I think there's an important component here that we're disconnecting between the two philosophies. There is a change management component to an agile development cycle, and it is up to the Scrum Master or the project manager to manage that. What you've committed to do on the right side, today I'm going to tell you I will give you X, Y, Z in 1 year. But if you adopt the left side, the agile philosophy, you are getting in front of the customer and your stakeholder in 2 weeks or in 2 months your plan, and you're showing them a piece of what they will get, and they will see the map to completion. Now, when you're able to adjust along the way, scope may change. It may become, they might say, well, we don't even need what we thought we needed a year ago, we need this. It could actually cut down your deliverable time because they had this vision of grandiosity that is no longer required. Or it could expand your timeline because scope is now more complex. But that is what change management is. You cannot throw change management out with the bathwater.
Yeah. So I think she was very audible to everybody, so
Yeah,
I
I
don't
got
need
it
to
now.
repeat that. But the thing is that it's very important to keep that in consideration. The next slide actually talks about some of the changes. What we want to emphasize in Agile is not optimizing the total cost of delivering the project. It's optimizing the cost of change. We want to reduce the cost of change, be flexible, be nimble, because we know things will change. If I have a 1-year project and I committed to that today and deliver something 1 year later, and so many things have changed, every change management in a traditional approach is costly. What we want to do in Agile is to reduce that cost, and that's what comes in the next slide, actually. So I'm just giving some comparison of Agile versus Waterfall in some level of detail. Commitment and delivery. How does Agile differ from Waterfall? That's the first point there. Organizing to reduce the cost of change, not the amount of work. We may end up doing a little bit more work because we are trying to deliver every time that the customer can appreciate. There may be some optimization possible in a traditional approach where if we don't have anything in consideration that we have to deliver to the customer frequently, if we are so absolutely sure, yeah, waterfall may be cheaper, but any change happens, it becomes very expensive. We want to be accommodating that change in Agile. Balancing value delivery now and future ability, right? We don't want to end up building all architecture for the first 3 months of the project and then start delivering something later. We want to balance that with showing some value to customer to get some early feedback. There is a real balance that needs to be done, and that's what Agile encourages. There is no dogma about you have to do it one way or the other. That's why backlog grooming is a very important aspect. You need to intersperse architectural user stories versus customer-driven feature user stories. Deliver frequently on cadence. The scope can vary, but quality is important. We want to build in quality in Agile. Whereas in Waterfall, the commitment is important. I have seen most projects, when they get delivered, we make compromises. We just say, oh, this project has to go out on this date. There are all these bugs, let's fix it in the next release. How many of you have seen that happening over and over again? I think most of you would have seen that. So we want to build in quality. That's what is very important. So in Agile, the team is responsible for delivering. In Waterfall or traditional approach, is the project manager that's responsible. I've heard so much, some feedback from people, some executives and all. We don't have a single throat to choke. In Waterfall, I had the project manager that I could choke. Now I cannot get hold of anybody to choke. I mean, it's a valid comment, but then what do you get by choking project manager if there were other project problems that made it not successful? So the other types of changes, effectiveness is what is important in Agile, not efficiency. You will see, I don't have any charts talking about the queuing theory aspects and all. I think some discussion happened in the Monday's Agile meet. When you start loading up your resources or people, 100% or more than 80%, then there's going to be enormous delay because of people waiting for others to get things done. So effectiveness is very important in Agile. Whereas in Waterfall, we plan everything and then we optimize utilization of resources. defer decisions to last responsible moments in Agile. In Waterfall, we want to make early commitments and we want to minimize changes, right? It's true, because change management is expensive. In Agile, we want to try out different things, fail fast and cheaper, maximize learning. In Waterfall, the approach is analyze as much as possible early enough so that you will get it right the first time. And invariably will be wrong because it's always new technology, new areas of work. There's a lot of variability. How do you track progress? We talked about this quite a bit. Continuous value delivery actually shows what you have delivered in terms of percentage. Whereas in traditional approach, it's like, oh, 10% of work is done, 20% work is done, 50% work is done. Reality, we never know what's going on because there's no visibility to that. And then again, individuals and interactions, people-based versus resources-based, self-organizing teams versus in Waterfall, it's the hub and spoke model. Project manager is there as a center, coordinating a lot of activities between different people. There's limitations to all these things, right? Teams share the ownership. In traditional approach, teams do not feel the ownership. And then in Agile, we want to have servant leaders that are in a trusting and supportive relationship, whereas in Waterfall or traditional approach, it's command and control relationship. So this is somewhat a summary of difference between Waterfall and Agile. Any questions? Okay.
I don't understand how specialized skills don't matter in Agile.
Specialized.
So technical skills matter. That's a waterfall trait.
Yes. Technical skills matters, but we want people to have broader skills. We want people to fit into multiple roles so that we don't have bottlenecks to have only one person can do a particular kind of work as much as possible. We want people to be flexible in doing the work. We don't want people to say, get pigeonholed to say, I'm only going to be able to do this kind of work, and every work has to be tuned to that person to get things done.
But isn't that kind of oversimplified? I mean, in terms of, so I'm trying to figure out how to map this to my world, where I've got system areas that are extremely complex, and I can't just say, somebody else, you're now assigned to this very complex portion of our code. It takes years to understand it. So it's just easy to say, but I don't see how it actually applies to one or the other.
Yeah, so I mean, it is a broad topic to discuss. The question was, how do we say that specialized skills are not required, or specialized skills, how do we manage specialized skills in waterfall approach, in agile approach? So we can talk about it afterwards. This was one of the main topics that got discussed in the other Agile meetup where Ken Rubin, who is the author of Essential Scrum, he talked about component-based teams versus feature teams, and he touched upon that to a great detail. It's a big topic, but there is a lot of material on how to handle some of those things. You cannot do away with completely by having only broad-shaped skills. That's why it's called T-shaped skills. There is some depth required, but we also want to have some flexibility in how people are going to take up their tasks. We don't want them to say, I'm only going to do this, nothing else. Then that makes it really difficult to be agile. So this is just an overview of the manifesto, the values and principles. I'm not going to talk about this. This is very well documented, and I think most of you will be familiar with this one. So there are lots of agile practices. I just took it out from Wikipedia to show it here. I'm not going to talk about any of these things. If you are interested, we can talk about this in the break. Here is a cheat sheet This is also available on the internet. You can just Google this and you'll get that. Talks about all the rituals and ceremonies and practices and all. And then just, I'll not talk about this a little, right now because we're running out of time, but we are going to talk about this. These are some of the lean principles and how do we avoid waste. We applied these ones in our journey and we'll talk about it during the journey. So we'll need to have a workshop, but I'll let Kuntal talk about it.
Sounds good. So thank you, Prakash. Great job so far. Hope you guys enjoyed the presentation so far. Learning about the value of Agile and if you have an opportunity, how do you transition from waterfall projects to Agile as well. We'll take a break for about 20 minutes. We got refreshments and snacks for you guys. Great way to network with your colleagues and friends here as well. We'll come back, let's see, 7:40, 20 minutes break.
Okay, sure.
Does that sound good?
Yeah, but I'll give out those sheets now so that you can take a look at it during the break and then discuss among your table members and come back with a recommendation on how would you handle such a situation if you were going to apply some agile principles. And when you're taking break, I'll just distribute it to you.
Yeah, we'll pass on the worksheets to on each table. By the way, if anyone has a job opening,
Director of Project Management over at Cirrus Corporation up in Concord. We're a small biotech company in the blood banking business. We help make blood safer for blood banks like the American Red Cross and hospitals and things like that. And I have a number of openings in my department. Specifically here, I'm here tonight because I have an opening in project management. So if you're interested in that, you're interested in working in biotech, come find me.
How do you spell the name?
CERUS. Thanks.
thank you, Lloyd. We have one more person, our president actually, of PMISV. He's got an announcement about job.
Hello all, I work for Safeway. Right now I'm interviewing for a senior project manager in supply chain warehouse management. If you have experience in the supply chain area and warehouse in particular, send me your resume. You can send it to president@pmisv.org and you'll be interviewing with me. So that's a positive.
He's the PMO director of that, so we're going to talk to him anyway. So, thank you, Manu. So just want to let you know, guys, so we're going to be posting slides, PDF, on the event page after the event, perhaps maybe within a week or so after the event, after tonight. So no need to Google, like Prakash said, for that cheat sheet and other things. It's going to be available on the event page as well. So with that, let's start again. I think we're going to do some group exercise, and Prakash is going to start with that.
Thank you, Kuntal. So I think most of you must have some sheets on your tables. Just take a look at that and choose one scenario that you may want to discuss about within your table group, and 5 minutes for that, and then come back with a recommendation on what you would do. Just agree among yourselves, and one of the members of your team just say what scenario it is and what was your recommendation, what you wanted to do in terms of how you fix that problem using the Agile principles. These are actually realistic scenarios that we had on the project. So just choose one scenario. I provided the material for you to get the context of what was happening with the project. But just choose one scenario and just say which one you have chosen and what's the recommendation. Just agree, discuss among your table group. 5 minutes. It's 7:45. Start at 7:50. What we did in each of the phases to make things happen. It didn't happen all at once. It was a journey, and that's why I called this as a journey. No agile transformation can happen in a big bang. It's always a journey. We cannot make all the decisions in one shot and expect it to be successful. We have to learn from our failures too. So, I'll just plot some results. Okay, so in terms of what we did, what was the output produced by these teams? This is a list of all the capabilities, you may want to call it features, user stories, or whatever that happened. The journey started in May of 2012 for this program, and we had major releases every 6 months and minor releases every 2 months. Although it just shows a little bit skewed here because it's the actual data, but the intent was to have major releases every 6 months and minor releases, couple of minor releases in between, which would be every 2 months. So you can see that initially when the Agile adoption happened, the team, as you have seen, was not at all focused on what they needed to do. They were all distracted, they were all on some other programs, there was no focus on this program. We had to bring them all together, build the team, establish a cadence of how things will be done, all of those things that you will see a little bit in the next slide. So when we started that, in the first release that they completed, they had delivered about 117 capabilities. The next release, they delivered 207 capabilities, and then 329 capabilities. So you can see how the team was on a roll. They started delivering aggressively, they were all responsible for doing that, they were all enthused about it, and so things started working. There was a downfall here. I'll tell you the reason when I click the next button here, what happened, why there was a dip in deliverables. But then the team came back and delivered even more afterwards. We were spending about 2 million per quarter when we started this program. That's when we started the Agile adoption. And then we found out that there was a lot of wastage that was not at all accounted for. So we quickly took action, and after that it was 1.25 million per quarter was what we were spending on this program. So then we even optimized more, and it was about less than $1 million per quarter that we did. And this was the most optimum investment on this program. And you can see the delivery was pretty good. Due to some other macroeconomic factors within the business unit, we had a big dip in investment, and we lost some very crucial resources because they all left. And so our output was much lower, and so you can see that this one was result of that lower investment. But the team came back because they understood how to work even in that low investment mode, and there were other factors. There were some other teams that were let go, and we got their capabilities to be implemented as well. And so what you see as higher deliverable here is because of some kind of roadmap reshuffle that we could do. We delivered our 80% of the features in 50% of the time, and then we got some other teams user stories or features that we had to deliver, and we delivered 80% of that as well. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the last slide when we talk about how this became higher. So we use some techniques to, okay, I'm getting a signal that we are running out of time.
Question, so what is user stories actually released to the end customer, or they were just delivered at the developer?
These are user stories delivered to the end customer.
They're equal in weight?
I'm sorry?
They're equal in weight? Each
They
one
are
takes
not-
roughly the same amount of...
They are not equal in weight, and that is the, see, whatever made sense to deliver as a unit of functionality to the end customer, that's what we are measuring here. In some cases, in some releases, all the bugs were grouped into one user story and delivered. In some cases, they delivered some critical user stories, some critical bugs as independent user stories. So it's not all the same, but it's a general measure. That's why it's very hard to get this kind of data for 3 years, but the general trend indicated that there was good progress and there was a lot of customer engagement and customer satisfaction. That shows with the next set of data that I want to show in terms of how the business did. The past year, this business did $90 million. A year before that, it was $50 million. And when the journey started, the business was at $30 million. So you can see over the 2.5 years, the business business improved 3 times, and the productivity improved almost 10 times. Or productivity and business, when you put them all together, it's a 10 times improvement over that 2.5 years. So it's a remarkable improvement that nobody has documented that kind of a result. You can see the investment reduced, but still the productivity was high. So this is all because of the team embracing Agile and making things happen. So we'll talk about quickly what happened in each of the phases and how the results were achieved, because we're running out of time. I'll be quick in this one. So one of the most important things we had to do was to restructure the team and bring about the co-location of the teams so that there is less time wasted in deferring decisions, in not making proper decisions, in not having the proper teaming relationship, in not getting people to feel the ownership of what they were doing. By giving ownership to localized teams where they could make quick decisions among themselves and make things happen, there was a lot of team joy and satisfaction in making things happen. We filled the essential roles at that time, Scrum Masters and proxy product owners. We trained the team in strategies of release planning, and we let them execute. Then we talked about this phase where we found out that there was a lot of money spent in areas that was not contributing to the program. So we removed all that budget waste. There were many team members who did not want to work in this kind of an environment. You saw the dysfunctional attitudes that were there. Many of those people left the team, so that saved us quite a bit. We grew the team in India as they took more and more responsibilities. That helped us optimize as well. And then there were many of these meetings, and we cut down most of the meetings to just 2 per week. We made some conscious decisions as to how to apply the lean principles to say what is really required and what's not required. And so it really helped, and people were able to focus on their work and became highly productive. The next period, I'm calling it as the learning period, because as we delivered one release, we had some serious retrospection done. There was a lot of retrospection every sprint and lots of good feedback, and the release also gave a lot of retrospection. There was a lot of issues relating to dev and QA relationship, how they were being handled. There was a lot of handoff needs, throwing it across the fence, and they wanted all predetermined listed builds, when the build will happen, how many things will go in the build. Even if you put one more update, if the team was so encouraged to put one more update, the QA would say, I will not take this build. So we had to change all that attitude and bring them together. So all that learning happened and we brought them all together. We fixed the release, the regression test suites. There were 7,000 test cases you saw in the scenario, and we found that a lot of them were duplicate, and there were only probably about 2,000 to 3,000 test cases that were unique, and it was never reviewed, and we were spending lots of time doing regression testing in every minor and major release, and we couldn't optimize that at all. And then we started bringing in test automation engineers so that we could automate all those tests. Continuous integration, continuous build, all of those things were put in place. And then we also took a look at what is required to fix the deployments, how to have well-known scenarios to be tested. So all this learning happened. And this was the time when there was a lot of optimization. The team was so self-organizing, self-empowered. They were enthused about how to get things done. Partners were all very encouraged because of what they saw that was coming. They were giving valuable feedback all the time. We put in a lot of architectural enhancements. We worked with our third-party framework vendor, who was also very encouraged with what was going on, and they contributed to this effort as well. And then the down period came because of various factors. We had to lose funding and resources, but still the team pulled through and got something delivered in that release. And then in the next one, so this is where I wanted to talk about, we had originally planned to deliver based on our resources, whatever was coming to, whatever we could do. But when we found out that another team that are partners to deliver some other aspects of this same program, when they were all let go, we got all their deliverables also that we had to do. They had done some partial work, but it was not something that met the customer needs. So we took that as the roadmap, and in the end, we could do all this kind of reshuffle only because we were continually delivering everything as end user value material. So we could quickly switch to the next set of deliverables, and the final delivery was much higher than what would have happened if we had taken this course. So that's why you see, even though the team was only capable of delivering so much, they ended up delivering a lot more because they could accommodate more things during that period. So this is the summary of transformation. That I'm just rushing through this because we are running out of time. The overall summary in terms of the Agile journey, the biggest success factor was the great partnership between the product management team and the engineering team. If that is not there, if you don't have good partnership with your customers or somebody who represents the customer, the Agile journey is not going to be successful. Creating the right team structure is very important. If that is not taken care of, then the program will not be successful. And then it's the team that delivers whatever we want. It's not anybody forcing anything on them. It's not the project manager. It's the team that has to be dedicated. They have to be empowered. They need to have that inspiration to deliver. And then the management needs to know when to step back and let the team deliver. Let the team make mistakes, learn quickly, deliver. So these were the important factors that that helped in our transformation. Okay, sorry I had to rush through the last few slides, but if you have more questions, I'll be here, and if there is something that's of common interest, Rich, tell me how you want that.
Well, first of all, we're congratulating on an excellent presentation. Thank you very much. Great presentation, huh, guys? Thank you very much for sharing all that wealth of information as far as your experiences in transforming an organization to Agile. One of the things that we're trying to do tonight, it's a new approach, is that we need feedback, your feedback on the section and the topic that was presented tonight. Many people have been here before, have noticed that we have flip charts in the back and we ask for your input. We get very little. So we're going to tie that to an incentive tonight. Isn't that fun? So each of you guys have some post-it notes on your table. And we're going to ask just randomly for you to kind of, is it right, rate the session tonight as to, because we really need to know if we're providing you with the right content that you as members want. And so green post-it will be for the session was good. Yellow's neutral, pink or red is for improvement. We hope if you say improvement, if you can write something on that. With that, Kuntal, Gianna are going to circulate with bowls around. As you put in your ballot, your input for tonight, we want you also then put a business card or write your name on a yellow sticky and put in the drawing for one of our gifts. See that? We're going to incent you to give us feedback. It's not rocket science, but we really need to know what you think about what's going on. Anyway, so we have a couple of gifts tonight. We have Waterfall to Agile, so another set of ideas. Before you guys leave, I want you to know that although we're giving away 3 gifts, there is a prize for everybody. So it's a consolation prize. Those of you who've been here before, no, so if you're leaving, grab something, get your prize before you leave. So we don't want you to go home empty-handed. I see you back there. Head over right over to the refreshment. Oh, he's going to miss it. Okay, there's Zoom crackers for everybody, including you, Dan. So why don't you guys circulate with the bowls? So we can go ahead and we want to wrap it up in a couple of minutes. So think about what your viewpoint of the session is. Put in a business card or for the drawing or for a book on the Agile or a certificate for either the Foster City Insights. I think you guys need to walk quickly with the bowls. Huh? Or yeah, he got it over there. Okay. So once you walk around, which one are you going for? Business card?